Hello everyone, Nick here again for What Game Now, and today we get another Theme Force video. This one is the Exemplar Interdiction Theme Force for the Protectorate of Menoth. So who are the Exemplar? The Exemplar Order is a religious order of knights devoted to the creator god Menoth. They view themselves as his soldiers, his warriors, his hand in the world, particularly with the intent to kill the non-believers and convert those who will survive. So they're based in the Protectorate of Menoth, so they actually serve as part of the Protectorate's military. You can think of them almost as a special forces unit. However, they're entirely very much melee and medieval focused. In the military, they use them as a heavy infantry unit designed for key critical battles. So a while back we talked about the Armored Corps. An Armored Corps was just the spear tip of the Khadoran army. These guys go to the hotspots. They're the ones who go in and they fix problems. And this theme force is the Exemplar going to war to either kill the non-believers or to protect some area of Holy Land in the name of the Creator God. So, without further ado, let's talk about the theme force itself. So, just a quick walkthrough here. Pretty standard Protectorate Warcasters and Warjacks. There are no restrictions whatsoever aside from the typical non-character Warjacks. You are allowed Fire of Salvation, who is a melee-focused jack usually associated with Krios, all three of his incarnations. He is allowed in this theme force regardless. It's worth noting Krios actually is an Exemplar. Exemplar models units, so this is any model with Exemplar in the name or in the tag, which is directly, or in the tagline, which is directly below the name. Reclaimer models and solos. Now, this is very interesting because it doesn't actually say units. This might actually be an error in the document, but there are no solos that are not also models. Now, this isn't really a problem because there are no Reclaimer units that exist. There's also no Scrutator and Vassal units, which we'll get to in a moment. Just a few comments on that while I'm here. The Scrutator and Vassal model units. So, what this collectively encompasses is the Exemplars are things like Exemplar Ariants, Exemplar Avengers. They all have Exemplar in the name pretty much universally. The only one that doesn't is a unit called Rovan and Company, or I think that, cannot speak today, my apologies. Visigoth, Judaiah, Rovan, and Honor Guard. That's who I'm thinking of. So they're listed as an Exemplar unit in their tag below their name. Other than that, everything has Exemplar in the name. The Reclaimers. So the Reclaimers you're looking at are things like the Reclaimer Gatekeeper and Hand of Silence, who is this really close combat monster. Scrutator solos, there's only the one that I'm aware of, and that's Scrutator Potentiate Severius, which is effectively referred to as Sevi-Zero, because he is actually a past incarnation of Severius the Warcaster. He is actually a journeyman Warcaster with 5 focus, so he's actually quite powerful, and he'll show up quite a few times later. Vassals, you're looking at Vassal Mechanics, you're looking at Vassal of Menoth, both of which are going to be critical if we're going to go Warjack heavy. And then to top things off, we get the Choir of Menoth, the Hierophant, and the Rack. 3 very bread and butter Menoth support units that pretty well go everywhere Menoth does. Standard merc options from here out, you can include 1 partisan unit one mercenary unit and solo, even if it has the partisan rule. They cannot gain ranking officer attachment, so that means they never count as friendly faction. Because of that, this is not a common theme force you see mercenaries in. Requisition options, pretty standard here. You have the standard command attachment. You have the standard smaller medium base solo. Smaller medium base doesn't matter because there's a large base solo in this theme. The free stuff, the only option you have outside of those 2 is 2 Vassal solos for 1 requisition point. Now, that's kind of helpful. However, it is worth knowing that this doesn't let you go above their normal field allowance, which is 2. So keep that in mind. Rules. Melee weapons of Protectorate Warjacks in this army gain Blessed. So Blessed is an attribute given to a weapon that says you ignore armor and defense bonuses provided by spells. So a couple things to know about that. Animi are considered spells. Feats are not. So if an Animus gives +2 armor, you will ignore that. If a feat grants +5 armor, you do not ignore that. You also do not ignore any defense bonus gained as a consequence of an effect of the spell. So, for example, if a spell creates a cloud effect, one of the effects of that cloud is +2 defense for concealment if you're inside the cloud. Bless does not ignore this. So it's kind of weird. Just look at the spell. If it explicitly says plus a defense and armor, you ignore it. Otherwise, in general, you don't. And the last one, which is kind of cute more than anything, Exemplar models gain Aegis. Aegis is immune to continuous effects. There are 2 continuous effects, fire and corrosion. You are immune to the continuous part of their effect. So normally you can light a model on fire, or it can be continuously affected by acid. You're immune to this. You don't take the damage from it. However, you can still be hurt by fire and corrosion attacks, which is a very unfortunate distinction to make there. So if somebody shoots you with a flamethrower, you're not immune to it. But if you survive, you don't suffer the effects of getting lit on fire. Hooray. So, a couple of things that come out of this theme force right off the bat. We have both a warjack and an infantry bonus, and we have a lot of the desirable models for a warjack heavy list. So this is going to be a theme force going forward that will be able to run both warjack and infantry heavy. Speaking of which, let's talk about some strengths and weaknesses of this theme force. The infantry models, the exemplars, almost universally have a rule called Weapon Master on their melee attacks, which is an additional dice of damage. They don't have to charge. They don't have to get charged. They just always roll, usually 3 dice, or they just roll an extra dice whenever they roll a melee damage roll. Now, it is worth noting this is an additional die of damage, not boosted, meaning you will still be able to boost your attacks if for some reason you're able to do that. This means most Exemplar in this theme force charge and roll 4 dice damage on a charge, which is pretty friggin' powerful. That makes this theme force hit really hard. You know, a couple guys get to you and they're trashing warjacks. Durability-wise, if you go warjack heavy, or this is a theme force that has access to some medium-based units, you can get a pretty durable theme force out of this. We'll actually talk about it. There's one caster in particular, Tristan Durant, and if you run him alongside Bastions, alongside a Bastion Seneschal, which is a model that you can take, you end up with this almost self-healing monstrosity that is almost unkillable, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Lastly, the Warjack build is pretty powerful because it ignores most buffs. So Menoth buffs its own stats, and then it's taking your buffs away. The outcome is this Menoth stuff really hits above its weight class, just in general. Now, as for weaknesses, this is kind of a slower theme force. It's not that slow. There are ways around it. One of the units that we'll recommend taking is called the Exemplar Errants. They have advanced deployment, which helps you with your speed issue, but ultimately you're mostly working with speed 5 and 4 models, which is a little bit less than desirable. Also, because you are playing Menoth, terrain is universally a problem in your faction. So if there's a big old forest sitting in the middle of the table, you're not going to be happy about this. Lack of guns. So everything I talked about in the strengths was, hey, your melee weapons do this. Your melee attacks get this. Your warjacks ignore buffs in melee. I didn't talk about guns. That's because there's literally one unit in this entire theme force that has guns, and I think there's like 2 solos that have guns. Everybody else is entirely melee focused. This is a problem because it means that if something gets in your way, your only recourse is to stab it to death. You can't clear it off with ranged attacks. Lastly, if you don't go the durability route, which is a warjack or a medium-based heavy build, your baseline infantry, the Exemplar Errants here shown on the right, and the Exemplar Knights, actually die pretty fast when you shoot at them. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that if you don't build it for defense or for range durability, it's not going to be range durable. You can do that, it just requires a conscious decision. So let's hop right into the Warcasters. So this depends entirely on whether or not you go Jack Heavy or not. If you don't go Jack Heavy, I would recommend looking at Krios 2, who has a lot of really cool abilities, and his feat is absolutely amazing when it comes to Exemplars. It gives all of your guys an extra melee attack, which is really good. I don't think I need to explain why. You know, you're getting an extra melee attack. And on top of that, that attack automatically hits. That's pretty good. So you get 2 free attacks that auto hit, He also has a few noticeable spells. He gives his battle group countercharge, which can help you survive. He can strip upkeep spells. He has an armor debuff to your own guys, and he's got something that says when enemy models kill your own trooper models, or just kill warrior models in general, they become knocked down. He likes the Exemplar. He helps them get there, and he helps them do damage when they get there. The Harbinger of Menoth is just a generically amazing caster. So just a quick brief run through on her. She's focus 10. Yes, you heard that right. That is the highest focus stat in the game. She is defense 14, armor 14. She has 17 hit points, which isn't terribly impressive. She's command 12, which actually is important because she has a spell called Awe. Enemy models in her command range, living models I should say, suffer -2 to attack rolls. Your opponent charges in a bunch of Mat 6 infantry. They are now Mat 4. That's a problem for your opponent. She can't get knocked down. Her melee weapon auto hits, but her other key ability is called Martyrdom. When a living it just reads as when a living friendly faction model, non-Warcaster warrior model in this model's command range is disabled. So it's after attacks, after the tough roll. This model can suffer D3 damage points to remove 1 damage from the disabled model. This model cannot spend focus to reduce this damage. So what the heck does this mean? Your opponent went through all this effort to kill a guy. He lived. There's no limit to the number of times she can use this ability aside from her own hit points, and she can target the same guy multiple times. She is phenomenal at covering key models. Spell-wise, she has a movement buff. She has a, which applies when they charge. She has a spell that gives a unit an additional die to attack rolls on its next turn. She strips enemy upkeep spells, and she can prevent enemies from receiving orders. Lastly, her feat is in her 20, if they end their movement in her command range, closer than they started, they suffer a POW 14 damage roll. So the idea is the Harbinger actually sits pretty far forward. You surround her with guys. Your opponent can't kill the guys, and for 1 turn when they come into you, they're eating a POW 14 to the face. It's after they move, so it is before they attack. Generally very useful caster. And then the last one is Serenia, who is a fairly new caster. She was actually designed to specifically go into Exemplar. She has a lot of really powerful abilities that work only on Exemplar models. She has a lot of spells that they like. She has a defense debuff. She has an armor buff. She has a to hit and damage buff. She has a speed buff. Her feat gives your guys defense. When they die, they get to immediately move, and you can move and attack with another model. It's just crazy. She's a phenomenal caster. So if you're going infantry heavy, I'd pick one of those 3. If you're going Jack heavy, my 2 recommendations are Resnick 2 or Amon Adraza. They both have very Warjack heavy abilities. Adraza has Synergy, which is kind of his big deal, which buffs your guys as they're inflicting as they attack your opponent. And then Resnick 2 has Curse, which is really nice, and just another number of other very useful abilities. If you want to run either, Krios 3 and Thyra can actually run pretty well in both theme forces. They have both Jack and infantry-based buffs that the Exemplars quite like. And casters to avoid Malekith, Fiora 1, and Fiora 2. And the reason why is a lot of their abilities are fire-focused, or focused on things like Flame Guard or Daughters. They don't get the mileage out of the Exemplar Interdiction theme force. It's not that it's a bad choice, it's just there's way better ones. Alright, Warjacks. So in the infantry build, the ranged Warjack is pretty much the default. Most common ones are the Judicator and Redeemers. Judicator because it's a giant rocket platform, and we'll talk about it in a moment. You can buff the crap out of this thing. And a Redeemer, which can fire up to 3 rockets a turn, especially if you have a Choir involved. These rockets hit very hard. Just in general, it's a very strong model. If you're worried about caster defense, the Devout and the Vigilant are very common. In fact, if you run the Harbinger, you pretty much are going to start with a Devout and a Vigilant to support her so she can survive, because she is kind of squishy. The Devout has Shield Guard, which is really nice. It basically says if your opponent shoots your caster, the Devout can take it for your caster, which is pretty good. The other major ability has a spell barrier. While it's base to base with the caster can't be targeted by spells, which is really good. And then the Vigilant, when it's base to base with its caster, that caster does not suffer blast damage. And it also provides cover as if it were an obstacle. So your caster can touch it, be hiding behind it, get cover when it's being shot at, and not suffer blast damage if they miss. Now, these two jacks don't have any real melee output or ranged weapons, but in general, that's going to keep your caster alive in a lot of situations. Other than that, things like cheap heavies, if you're going to omit the ranged units, Crusaders are great. There's nothing wrong with a Crusader. Jacks to avoid, Purifiers, Guardians, and Castigators. They're kind of specialized. If you want jacks, you really want the jack to really hit hard. You're not really... When you build Exemplar Interdiction, you're most likely building it to kill stuff. These jacks don't really help you do that much better. They're kind of support tools. This is very much a theme force that benefits from tournament formats where it allows multiple lists to be played. So in a Warmachine tournament, players actually bring multiple lists and pick theirs after they see their opponents. This is very much a theme force that benefits from that because its weaknesses are pretty extreme. Its strengths are pretty extreme. And that's true of most theme forces. But these jacks just don't help with either of those. They're not covering a weakness or they're not emphasizing a strength. Fire of Salvation, pictured here on the right. He shows up reasonably often. If you're running Jack Heavy, you're probably going to take Fire of Salvation. If you're running any of the Krioses, you're probably going to take Fire of Salvation. He's really cheap at 14 points, and the most important ability he has, well, one of them, is called Righteous Vengeance. As infantry models die around him, at the start of your next turn, he gets a 3-inch move and a punch, which really helps his movement. Alright, units. All of the units are quite good. They just have their places. The medium base units are the Exemplar Bastions and the Exemplar Incinerators. The Exemplar Bastions are a super tanky defensive unit that also happens to hit pretty hard. They have a 2-inch melee, so your opponent really can't get around them effectively. And they have a rule called, let me pull up the exact name, I believe, I know I get an award for preparedness. Sanguine Bond. So when it suffers damage, you can choose one or more models in the, when it's in formation, you can choose one or more other models in its unit to suffer any amount of damage divided as you choose. Long story short, I hit a guy. I deal 5 damage to him. I can put 1 damage on on him and 1 damage on each of his buddies. You can spread the damage out. In practice, what this means is you effectively have to deal 20 damage to the unit before you kill a model, because they're allowed to spread it out as they want. And the Bastion Seneschal, who is a model that goes into support, lets you heal 1 point of every Bastion, or every Exemplar model, actually. Is it every Exemplar? Again, I've read a lot of these. I know what this stuff does. I apologize. Usually when I see the Exemplar Bastion Seneschal, or a lot of these models, they're showing up with the things that they're buffing. So sometimes I don't remember how exactly the buffs work. Yes, so it is only Bastion. So basically at the start of the turn, that begin an activation of the command range of a Bastion Seneschal, so 10 inches, they heal a damage point for free. If all 5 guys got damaged, that's 5 hit points every single turn. And then one of the casters initiate Sovereign Tristan Durant has a spell that just heals every living model in his control area for like D3 damage. The result is this unit is nigh on unkillable. It is really hard. Their defense 11, which is kind of low. Their armor 16, which is really good. If your opponent walks into their melee range, they immediately punch it. If they're charged, they suffer -2 to their attack roll. It's a phenomenal defensive unit. They're kind of expensive, which is the only downside. Incinerators, another medium-based unit. They hit really, really hard, and another big thing that they have is they remove tough. So that's kind of important because tough can be really annoying in a melee-heavy build because oftentimes you don't have the options to get additional attacks on that target. They just say no tough. Errants are your only ranged unit. They have crossbows. Their crossbows aren't great for damage, but they're great for infantry removal. And they're going to show up in effectively every list. Knights Exemplar are your cheap generic melee unit. They only come in 6-man squads, which is a curse and a blessing. It's a curse in that it makes one unit very undesirable. It's a blessing in that it makes them really cheap. Vengers are the cavalry, very fast, hit reasonably hard. Just, again, fairly strong. They actually get stronger when they're damaged. Rovin is a support unit that also happens to fight very well. The best thing to do with him is to read him and to look at him and say, does he apply to my army? He's optional if you don't want him. And if you're running a Jack build or a build that's going to rely on your Warjacks to do things, you're going to want some Choir. Even a minimum unit of Choir, just 4 guys, goes a long way. Solos, there's a lot of solos in this theme force, like quite a few of them. And some of them are generically useful, some of them are not. If you're going Jack heavy, Severius 0. He has an ability called Eye of Menoth. He's useful in the other theme forces. The problem is he has to have a Warjack because he has the he's a journeyman Warcaster. The infantry heavy theme forces don't really want more Warjacks. They kind of want to spend the minimum on Warjacks and the maximum on troops. So you don't see him outside of the very Jack heavy builds. But he makes the Jacks hit really hard. He's got a spell called Road to War, which helps stuff move around, which is pretty powerful. And then Vassal Mechanics and Vassals, just generically useful stuff. The Mechanics repair your own guys, which can be really helpful. You know, your opponent shoots your Warjack, blows an arm off, you can get the arm back. The Vassal of Menoth has 2 very powerful abilities. The first is Empower. He can just hand out a focus if you want him to. And Enliven. Target friendly faction Warjack, if it's in range, the next time it suffers damage, it can immediately make a full advance. So your opponent walks up, punches your Warjack, it just walks out. If you're going medium base heavy, Bastion Seneschal. Say it with me, Bastion Seneschal. He's going to heal your Bastions, he lets your medium base stuff move through each other. He actually does that to all of them, so he's kind of useful in the other theme forces too, but he shows up most often in the medium base theme. And Gravis. So Gravis is a cavalry solo. He's actually a dragoon, so if you shoot him off his horse, he just stands back up. He has a rule called Desperate Pace, which helps you really speed up your own guys. And he has Brother's Keeper while in his command range of 10. Friendly Exemplar models cannot become knocked down or stationary, which really helps because you're an infantry-heavy theme. Knockdown and stationary are kind of apocalyptic because you have to forfeit something you don't want to lose. And then he himself is just a monster in combat. He can make he can boost attacks. He can make additional attacks because he collects souls. If you're going for the regular troops, not the medium bases, Gravis, the Bastion Seneschal, but the Knights Exemplar Seneschal is actually very common too. So this guy has a very strange rule. Effectively, what he does is when he dies, he doesn't actually die. Instead, he's knocked down and can't take any more damage and can't activate. So let me just read the ability. When a living friendly faction model in this model's command range is destroyed by an enemy attack, after the attack is resolved, this model can remove 1 damage point. When this model is disabled, it becomes knocked down instead of becoming boxed, and its activation immediately ends. So what this means is anytime it hits the disabled step, it doesn't move on to the box step, it just immediately becomes knocked down. This is not limited. It is actually unkillable. And it heals if you kill guys around him. The way that it dies is if it's disabled and knocked down at the start of the maintenance phase, it is destroyed. So he's on the ground. He still qualifies as disabled because you never go to the box state. He just becomes knocked down. If he's still like that at the start of the turn, that's the only way to remove him. So what people do is they take this guy and they just throw him in a zone. He's disabled. He can still score. So, oh, look, he's knocked down or he's bleeding on the ground. Who cares? He's functionally unkillable until the start of the next turn. Your opponent can't actually remove this model on their own turn, which is really good. And then Gravis and the Bastion Seneschal for reasons I mentioned above. The Bastion Seneschal lets your guys move through each other. Very helpful. Gravis it's Gravis. Gravis is a great model. Speeds your guys up and has a number of his own buffs. In any list, Rax and Elias Gade and the Hierophant are all fairly common. The Hierophant is kind of caster specific, but it's never a bad choice. Rax are really cheap and they give you a caster extra focus. Again, never a bad choice. Elias Gade is actually an Exemplar Errant. He's not literally, actually, yeah, he actually is an Errant, yeah. Advanced deployment, defense 12, armor 16. He's got his little crossbow. He actually has 2 crossbows. So he can shoot 2 guys per turn, and he's Rat 7, so he's really good at it. If he kills you with a melee attack, you can immediately shoot. Also really good. He ignores stealths and cloud effects. Also really good. When instead of making a damage roll, he can just choose to inflict a damage point, and that model cannot make a tough roll. So hey, you got some tough troll guy in the way. Blink, take an auto point of damage, and he's dead. And then last, he's ability called Prey. Before the game starts, you pick an enemy model or a unit. Whenever he attacks that model, he gets +2 to his attack and damage rolls. That works in both melee and ranged attacks. If his prey is destroyed, he picks a new target. So this guy shows up in every theme force because he's a really good spot remover in a theme force that lacks really good spot removers. All right, building the theme. Let's wrap this up. So you got a couple of choices. If you go Jack heavy, you want to put things like Errants. You want to put things like the Choir. You want Elias Gage. Probably want an Errant Seneschal, who's got some support tools for the Errants. Just a quick summary on him. The big thing he's got is they gain Unyielding, which helps you helps your guys survive in combat. It makes the unit last a little longer. It's not entirely required, but I would probably run one. Like I said, Gade, Choir, probably a minimum unit. I'd probably go for 2 minimum units before a maximum unit. Severius 0, he's typically going to run Adjudicator. So allow me to explain the hot craziness that is Severius 0 real fast. He is a Protectorate solo with the Battle Group Controller rule. Essentially, he's not a Warcaster, but he does Warcastery things. He can have Warjacks, he doesn't have a feed. He's defense 15, armor 15. Surprisingly good stat line, considering he has focus of 5, meaning he's effectively armor 20 when he gets shot, and you have to hit him at defense 15. This guy takes a Warjack to kill. Okay. Spell list, Immolation, generic crappy nuke spell. Most Warcasters and Juniors have access to something. Mystic Wards, enemy animi and upkeep spells on models in the spellcaster's battle group that are in its control area immediately expire. Cute. Enemy magic attacks targeting a model in the Warcaster's battle group suffer -5 range. That's important, because one of the most common ways to deal with Sevi 0 is to actually spell him to death. Run an Arc Nova up, shoot a couple spells through, and kill him. -5 range says that plan probably doesn't work. And Road to War, when a friendly faction model in the spellcaster's control range destroys one or more enemy models with a melee or ranged attack during this activation. Immediately after the attack is resolved, select one Warjack in the spellcaster's battle group as in its control range. It can advance up to 3 inches. So this doesn't work if you have Adjudicator, because Adjudicator can't move outside of its own activation. But if you give him something like a Redeemer, which is also perfectly valid, this gives you a little bit of a reposition choice. The Adjudicator is fairly common just because the Adjudicator gets... So Severius 0 does not have the focus to run multiple Warjacks. He likes to get as much value out of the focus he can hand out as he can. And most commonly, one of the best answers for that is just a Colossal, the Adjudicator being a prime example. All right, on to the most important ability. While in this model's control range. Control range is 10, by the way, on a speed 6 model. Friendly faction models gain +1 to attack and damage rolls. That's if they are in... The friendly models are in his control range. That is absolutely bonkers. Now, you can put him in the other theme forces. If you do that, give him a Redeemer, because the Redeemer is nice and cheap. He's not terribly common, although you will see him. But in any Jack-heavy build, you're going to see this guy. You're going to put Eye of Menoth out there, and you're just going to let the Adjudicator run riot. The Adjudicator, just so you're aware, has 2 power 14 rockets, 2 power 12 flamethrowers, 2 power 21 fists, and it launches out additional AoEs when it fires its rocket. So it fires its rocket, and you roll for 1 additional AoE deviation. Okay. Also, just randomly, as a rule called Reliquary, this model gains an additional die in attack and damage rolls. Discard the lowest result of each roll. So what does this thing do? You effectively have a power 17 rocket. Power 17. That is one of the strongest ranged weapons in the game. This is only using the Choir in Severius 0. At power 17, boost damage, you roll 4 dice, drop the lowest. Your average on that is somewhere around a 13. which means your average Warjack is going to eat about 12 damage per shot from this thing. You can blow a Warjack up in one friggin' turn. Couple focus to boost damage, and this thing just melts heavy targets. It has flamethrowers, which are spray attacks, which can kill multiple guys. The secondary AoEs on the Judicator, they're power 7, because it's just half of the 14, but they get +3, they're power 10. Okay, the blast damage on this Judicator is capable of killing things it shouldn't have any business killing. It's absolutely nuts. Really powerful model. This is why he shows up a lot. You are totally within your ability to put a Redeemer on him. The Redeemer just fires off 3 power 14 rockets and is nice and cheap. I'd put Sub-Zero with a Redeemer in most of the other theme forces if you have in most of the other builds if you have the points. Anyway, from there, I digress. Tangent over. Fill the rest of your points out with heavies of your choice. Medium base spam, you're going to start with Gauge, you're going to start with Errants with UA. You're going to take Bastions, a Incinerator unit with UA, and the Bastion Seneschal. It's the meat of your list. Pick a second unit of your choice. Second Bastion's never a bad one. If you take the second Bastions, make sure you have a second Seneschal. He's not a UA, but he's effectively the Bastion UA. Gravis, and then take Jacks with guns and probably some Choir. You're going to take Choir because you don't have a high volume of attacks in this build. So you want to get the most out of what you can. So you're looking at Redeemers. You're perfectly within your rights to run Adjudicator. And just kill stuff. I want to briefly mention why you might not want to put Sub-Zero in this theme force. So Sub-Zero has to take a Warjack. That is a generic rule of the game. He has to have a Warjack. That Warjack, because it's not assigned to your Warcaster, cannot spend Warjack or Warbeast points on it. So where most casters come with 28, 27 points for free, you're buying a Judicator who is 35, you're spending 7 to 8 points right there. If you put the Judicator on Sevi, you have to pay the full price for him. There is no discount. That has to come out of your army points, which means it's coming out of your infantry, which means it's coming out of your solos and your support characters. Now, you could put something really crappy on him, like, say, a Devout, and put the Judicator in your main list, but then you're still losing a little bit of infantry power. You could make this work. Sub-Zero with a Redeemer is droppable in pretty much any build, especially considering he can be free. So you are essentially just paying for the Warjack. Long story short, if you're going to put Sub-Zero in the not Jack heavy builds, which is perfectly fine, usually you're going to put a Redeemer on him. You want the gun. Just gives you some extra shots. The Redeemer is 11 points, which isn't that much more than a Vigilant. It's not that much more than a Devout. It's just 2 points. If you have to, you can cut it down to a Devout or even a Vigilant. If infantry heavy, you're going with Gade, Errants, UA. Notice a pattern here. Gade and the Errants plus UA are just generically useful. From there, your meat of your army is probably going to be Knights Errant, multiple units, 2 with UA, even 3 with UA. I've seen as high as 5. And Gravis, because Gravis. I think we've kind of tangented enough on Gravis to understand why. Just general useful abilities. So that brings us to the end of the Exemplar Interdiction. Next up is going to be a Crix theme force. I don't know which one yet. I haven't made that decision yet. It's probably going to be Dark Host, but that's not set in stone. All right. Have a good one, everyone.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already. And we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.